Good morning. My name is Mercedes Vela Monserrate, Head of Sustainable Finance at Abu Dhabi Global Markets, Abu Dhabi's International Financial Center, and I will be serving as your moderator for today's session, Quantifying the S in ESG. The health crisis, with its impact on economies, have led governments and businesses to realize the importance of resilience and sustainability, and that the environment, public health, and the performance of the economy are all interlinked. The crisis has brought into sharp focus that sustainability risks are not non-financial issues, they are financial risks. But the crisis has also revealed for many companies the benefits of investing in their social and human capital, which is enabling them to mobilize talent and resources in new ways and continue to function in uncertain circumstances. Nowadays, promoting gender equality in the workplace is something that many organizations are working towards, because it has been proven that companies whose leadership team is gender balanced have a higher return on equity when compared to organizations whose senior management team consists of men only. Italy is holding the presidency of the G20 and hosted the very first G20 Conference on women's empowerment, focusing, among other issues, on the quality of women's work, the implementation of policies aimed at increasing women's participation in positions of leadership, and the protection of women's rights. The UAE and Abu Dhabi in particular have similar ambitions. In fact, as we recognize the very global nature of the net zero and ESG agendas, we embrace gender equality as a performance enabler for our companies and as an attractive factor for our society in the UAE. I am delighted to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Mr. Stefano Pizzicanella, Director General of the Department for Equal Opportunities of the Presidency of the Council of Ministers of Italy. Mr. Pizzicanella has served as responsible for international relations at the Department for Public Administration and at the Committee for the Promotion of Leadership. During his professional life, he has been working at the UK Cabinet Office, European Commission, and European Parliament. He currently represents Italy in several international institutions and committees dealing with equal opportunities and gender issues and relevant committees at the Council of Europe. I would like to now hand over the floor to Mr. Stefano for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mercedes, and I would like to address all the participants that are following this event. I would like to thank Abu Dhabi Global Market for the invitation to take the floor on the occasion of the Expo on such an important theme like that of women's empowerment. And I would like to thank also the Italian Embassy in Abu Dhabi for having facilitated the sharing of the Italian experience. Talking about women's empowerment today is about the fundamental role of women in the post-pandemic recovery process and how much their contribution benefits the whole society, both from an economic and a human point of view. The issue of women's empowerment has been placed at the core of the Italian presidency of the G20 in a cross-cutting way, and has been addressed by the various working groups and ministerial meetings that took place in 2021 under the G20 umbrella. The G20 Conference on Women's Empowerment, which took place last August 26th in Santa Margherita Ligure, represented a synthesis of these thematic debates and of perspectives from different actors such as engagement groups, civil society, and business. We set a first important milestone within the G20 framework, which allowed the recognition of gender equality as a shared priority within the international community at global level. It was an exceptional occasion which involved the contribution of ministers, civil society, businesses, and academia. With this approach, it was possible to address an in-depth discussion on women's empowerment and gender equality, embracing its various dimensions and in full compliance with the cross-cutting nature of the issue. There was awareness that a response to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic must be shared and coordinated among the G20 countries. And on this point, the conference found absolute convergence with the vision of women's role in the recovery process. The crisis from which we are slowly emerging, with the heavy burden of its socioeconomic consequences, has affected all those economic sectors where the presence of women is dominant, such as catering, hospitality, and services, and which are often characterized by a high rate of informality and few guarantees in terms of social protection. Women, therefore, have primarily suffered the effects of the health, economic, and social crisis. Furthermore, the crisis has intensified cases of violence against women, making it a real emergency. The empowerment can be an answer to women's condition of danger, and it helps to recover victims of violence. Furthermore, we should not forget that women represent the majority of those working in the health sector, which has been most impacted by the response to the pandemic emergency. Against this worrying scenario, the G20 Conference on Women's Empowerment represented a forum for a discussion focused on promoting an inclusive and sustainable economic recovery. Commitment must be focused on providing effective tools for women to be the pillar of sustainable and inclusive recovery, and to promote the opportunity for positive change involving institutions and society as a whole. Women's talent must be fully utilized on a global scale, and it is our duty to ensure the full and equal participation of women in societies and economies. We must fight the many factors that persist and undermine women's empowerment. Unacceptable stereotypes, which are often the cause of gender-based violence, the first obstacle to women's affirmation and autonomy in our society. Pivotal is the full participation of women and girls in STEM and the promotion of effective financial and digital literacy. These are all factors functional to the promotion of a gender perspective and women's role in the development of technologies necessary for the energy and digital transition, for the protection of the environment, and the fight against climate change. In addition, women's economic empowerment requires the elimination of all barriers that limit the chance of being both mother and worker at the same time, guaranteeing for those who wish to do so the necessary resources to pursue both paths. Adequate care, education, and social services are the key elements for any public policy that aims at supporting effectively women's empowerment. It is necessary to strengthen commitments and political actions aimed at closing gender gaps in the labor market and the wage gap, removing obstacles that effectively prevent women from accessing leadership roles, and finally supporting female entrepreneurship. All these elements were the reflection of those who participated at the G20 conference in Santa Margherita Ligure. I would like, however, to have the opportunity also to highlight some of the progress that are being brought forward in Italy in the national agenda for gender equality. The action of the Italian government continues to do its part not only at the international level, but also at the national one. The Italian Domani Plan, approved under the umbrella of the EU financing of the national recovery plans, has recognized gender equality as a cross-cutting priority, including measures to support employment, female entrepreneurship, and parenthood, and to introduce gender parity certification for businesses. The Italian path towards equality also includes the reform of the Family Act, a law proposal that has been submitted to organize family policies on several levels, starting from women's employment, educational services, sharing of care loads, and work-life balance. Furthermore, Italy can finally count on a national strategy for gender equality that was presented by Minister Bonetti, the Minister for Equal Opportunities and Family, in July this year. The national strategy provides an integrated approach to the promotion of equal opportunities and prepares the country to face the challenges of the times to come. The strategy provides for the creation of a more equitable world of work in terms of equal career opportunities, competitiveness, and flexibility through support for female participation, in particular by helping parents to reconcile life and career, and by stimulating female entrepreneurship, especially in the innovative fields. Regarding skills, the promotion of which is essential for the enhancement of female talent, the strategy aims to ensure equal opportunities in the development of skills and the application of individual talents in all disciplines, and in STEM disciplines, primarily by removing cultural barriers and gender stereotypes. Finally, I wish to emphasize that just a few days ago, Minister Bonetti also presented to the Council of Ministers a new national strategic plan against gender-based violence, which is designated as a structural tool for our country to ensure stable support to the anti-violence network and help all victims of violence in their journey out of violence and reclaim their freedom. We must bear in mind that violence against women is still the main obstacle for full female empowerment. It is a shared assumption that the achievement of full equality needs a global transformative agenda, which addresses with cross-cutting and systemic policies all the different aspects of women's life. The chair statement of Minister Bonetti of the G20 Conference on women's empowerment clearly states this. For this reason, the persistence of a high degree of multilateral coordination, which can also be promoted through moments of exchange, such as this one organized on the occasion of the Expo, remains an essential element. The agenda must become an effective tool that guarantees the adoption of a concrete and structural approach to women's empowerment. We have the tools to give a new impetus to international efforts, to make women not only equal participants in the recovery, but leaders of a balanced, inclusive, and sustainable growth, and that they can be protected from forms of violence. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a fruitful discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stefano. We are delighted to see the continuous commitment of the G20 towards gender equality. And we would also like to use this opportunity to thank the Italian Embassy in the UAE for their continued support towards ADGM Sustainable Finance and Gender Equality Initiative. Now, moving on to our panel discussion, it's my pleasure to introduce each of our guests today. Let me start with Her Excellency, Dr. Mariam Al-Suwaidi. Welcome. Dr. Mariam has held several leadership positions over more than 20 years. She's the first woman to occupy the CEO position in the history of the Securities and Commodities Authority in the UAE. Congratulations. She has also held several leadership positions within other institutions in the UAE, with a critical focus on financial markets, regulation, operations, AML, corporate governance, and sustainability, among other issues. Given her strong credentials, the Financial Action Task Force has recently accredited her as the first Emirati female expert to access countries under the Financial Action Task Force Mutual Evaluation Program. Dr. Al-Suwaidi holds a doctorate in law from the University of Leeds and a master's degree in commercial law from the University of Wales. Welcome.
Thank you.
Next one, we've got Diana Wild, co-founder of Aurora 50. Diana is an impact entrepreneur. She is the co-founder of Aurora 50, the social enterprise that created the Pathway 20 initiative, which works with market leaders, regulators, and boards to accelerate gender balance in the boardroom. A business and finance graduate from the University of Westminster, Diana is a business leader with 20+ years of experience across strategy and business development. Diana has always been passionate about making a difference and building communities, particularly in the area of diversity and inclusion. She's also a committee member for the Association of Corporate Treasurers in the Middle East. Welcome.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Jérôme Ponrouche, Head of Company Engagement at BNP Paribas, Corporate and Institutional Banking for the Middle East and African region. Since January 2020, Jérôme has been based in Bahrain, BNP Paribas regional headquarters, in an early capacity as a head of CSR and sustainable finance for EMEA. In his current expanded role, Jérôme's company engagement mission covers corporate and social responsibility and corporate communications. His focus is to support the business origination resources of the bank and grow sustainable finance as a client business, yet ensuring compliance with BNP's sets of CSR policies. Jérôme also promotes internal and external awareness on matters and expertise pertaining to the broad development of environmental, social, and governance factors. Welcome, and thank you very much for being with us today. We look forward to the discussions. Now, Diana, let me start with you. Let's set the scene. Why is diversity in the boardroom important for sustainability?
So, an integral component of sustainability is the ability to really embrace diversity, diverse communities, and the unique voices that they actually represent. We have increasing global challenges, whether that's climate change, resource scarcity, population growth, and it's more important than ever that we have the right voices around the table, that we have that diversity of thought to ensure that we can actually create a more resilient world. A recent Deloitte study actually found that when they compared the low and the high-performing boards were more likely to exhibit gender balance and inclusive behaviors. So when operating under an inclusive culture and inclusive talent practices, the organizations that had these environments generated up to 30% higher revenue per employee. They were more profitable than their competitors and 8 times more likely to achieve positive business outcomes. So it's not just a social need, but it's very much a business need. But diversity isn't just about gender, it's also about ethnicity, socioeconomic background, and these are all very important, but it's really about that diversity of thought that we need in the boardroom to ensure that we have those voices that are going to challenge, that are going to show those different perspectives and going to ensure that we ultimately have the very best solutions to the problems that we're facing, which is why it's no surprise that we're seeing more investors really looking at ESG measures, because they know that it ultimately leads to better performance, and they're looking at ways to obviously measure those companies for these types of factors.
Great. That's and again, what you mentioned around the business case, I guess now as well we see that, well, the world is interconnected, globalization. So as a company, if you want to keep up with, let's say, innovation, digitalization, you need to ensure that people around the table are sufficiently diversified so that they can come up with new ideas. Now, let me just go to Dr. Mariam now more for the macro view. What has been the impact so far of existing gender diversity practices on the financial performance of companies, linking to Diana's answer? In which areas have the companies tangibly benefited from increased participation of women?
Thank you, Mercedes, for the question. Gender diversity has benefit not only for businesses and companies, but also for the wider economy and countries. So various studies have confirmed, as Diana mentioned, that having a more gender diversified company management leads to better sales and revenues, and also increased profitability and market leadership. So I will cite a few studies here again. Let us consider the effect on profitability of companies. Boston Consulting Group examined more than 1,700 companies across different sectors and different sizes, and looking at the diversity level of their team. So BCG found that having a more diverse team increased earning before tax and interest by 9%, more than those companies with below average diversity in their management teams. Not only that, but diversity drives innovations, and innovation drives diversity. Similar findings were from also McKinsey through their report Delivering Through Diversity. They find that companies in the top 25% for gender diversity in their executive team were 21% more likely to outperform their competitors when it comes to profitability. Another study by Ernst & Young revealed that a company made up of at least 30% female leaders had 6% better profit margin than those that didn't. So this is one aspect. On revenue and competition, the BCG study found that greater diversity increased revenues by 19%. Also, businesses with employees from a good mix of ethnic backgrounds were 35% more likely to outperform their competitors. The same finding also from McKinsey study, which reveals that companies in the top 25% for ethnic cultural background and diversity in their executive team were 33% more likely to have industry-leading profitability. When it comes to corporate governance and overall, several studies using statistical correlation have confirmed that established that positive association exists between gender diversity and the impact on corporate overall and corporate performance. Because the reason for that is, you see, diversity enhances corporate decision-making process. So you have diverse characteristics, so that will ensure that there is oversight on top management, and of course, this will maximize shareholders' wealth. So all this shows that gender-balanced teams perform better than those that are not. So the effects can be felt across all functions of a company. So diversity, it's not only just being a good moral thing to do. It also has strong benefits to businesses. It also benefits the wider economy because it gets people more into employment and also balance out some of the key roles.
Great, thank you very much. So I think it's clear the business case is there. We've got the data to support the business case. Now, Jérôme, let me now come to you. As a company, in fact, a large international bank, what facts can you share about the gender equality performance of BNP Paribas, just to give us an example?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Mercedes. In fact, there are first a subset of answers to give you. First, we are a company which is close to 200,000 employees around the world. We are present in 68 countries. We count 171 different nationalities. At the G100 top executive, I think we count 10 different nationalities. So this diversity, we have always viewed it as an asset in order to perform better. So the first element is, where do we stand today? Because everything which was said before is already embedded in our governance for a reason that I can come back later in this panel. You take the board of BNP Paribas, we are 42% women. The board is made of, I think, 14 members. Executive committee, we are a little bit short of 1/3, and the board count 19 members. Then when we go down, it's around, women in strategic management position, as we call them, 3,000 employees. We are around 29%. Those are the numbers of 2020. So what we're doing in making sure that we achieve a proper balance in terms of governance between genders, and this is part of the overall inclusion that we have. And the gender is one aspect of it. This is what I'm focusing on right now. Is we have a Leaders for Tomorrow program, which identify the emerging talent in the staff of BNP Paribas, because let's face it, a bank and a financial service group like BNP Paribas is made of two things. I mean, human capital, IT, and financial capital. So it's all about investing in human capital and develop this capital throughout generations. We are a 200-year company, so a few things we've learned in the past, and we know that inclusion and diversity is something which works very well for our stakeholders and not only our shareholders. So bottom line, what we're doing is that through these programs, we are letting the new generation of young employees emerging with very much, and that's the second aspect. So that is the snapshot of what we do. An important aspect is the governance. It's not enough to say, oh, we need more women in executive and leading position. It's the way we nurture this, the way we make this happen matters as much as the result. Why? Because the last thing we want as a company, and this is very cynical, what I'm going to say, the last thing we want is to have women representation nurtured by positive discrimination, nurturing incompetent leaders. Okay, so incompetence has no flavor. You can be a man, you can be a woman, you can be very competent and skilled and capable in your profession, in your position, but you can be also the other side of things, and we want to avoid that. And at BNP Paribas, what we do is that meetings, for example, you can no longer have meetings or very difficult, and these are challenged where you have no women in the room. I am a man. I can tell you that when men are only among themselves, the speech and consideration can be different. And having a woman around is, in general, not to say always, helping a lot. The seriousness, the focus on achieving solutions that we want. So the conduct element is absolutely fundamental, and the conduct is built on governance patterns and rules inside the organization, trying to avoid the positive discrimination, because positive discrimination may defeat the very long-term purpose of changing what? The culture, which has been so far fairly male-dominated.
Thank you, Jérôme. So really what I'm hearing from your answer here is very much about attracting, keeping, and promoting to ensure that we have a fully diversified workforce at all levels of an organization. But Jérôme, concretely, as a financial intermediary with leading positions in sustainable finance, how does gender equality translate into clients' businesses? And if you could perhaps describe an example of an actual transaction.
Sure, absolutely. Well, in fact, to summarize, the first question was about what do we do as a company, like any other organization, public or private. So that is done, and it's all about meritocracy, making sure that we have the best among ourselves to lead the organization for success and meeting the expectations of our stakeholders and ensuring our relevance for the economy. At the end of the day, the same things, when you understand it properly, are not that complicated. Where it becomes complicated is when we face the entire environment, economic environment and social environment, which is the one of BNP Paribas in 68 countries with millions of clients. How do we translate this ethics in our organization into actual sustainable finance, which is a motto of the bank, as you know? Well, the example that I can share with you relates essentially to companies in the private equity space. And why did I choose private equity? Because when you think of it, private equity investment is where you pay a tremendous amount of attention to emerging companies, and emerging companies, in fact, nurture the innovation of the global economy, nurtures the transformation, nurture and feed on inefficiencies of the existing economies. When you think of it, there is something which is very important, prevalent in this client segment, as we call it at BNP Paribas, And therefore, the focus when it comes to gender equality on these client segment private equity funds are of importance. We are talking about fund financing here. So the first example that I have that comes to mind is Carlyle. We were earlier in 2021 part of a syndicated loan of more than $4 billion US. And this RCF, among its KPIs, structured as a sustainability-linked loan, emphasized on gender diversity at board level. Guess why? For exactly the two reasons that my colleague panelists have alluded for. You know, when you're serious about acknowledging the empiric representation of why and how an economy or a company perform, you simply take stock of it and act on it. Okay, so what do we do here? It's all about relevance and alignment of interest. Carlyle realized that when they invest in companies where they have a better representation or a more diversified board representation, including women, of course, they perform 12% better. A little short of the numbers that I heard before, but 12% is a big difference, okay? So this is what we do. That's the first example that this was earlier this year. The other example that I could mention is Baring Private Equity Asia. Maybe not everybody knows this company. This is an important client of ours in the Asia Pacific region. This is a company which managed $34 billion US, private equity, as I said. And the same we've done. We were the sustainability advisor of this company when they came to market for the first ever sustainability-linked loan. I think it was 4 years in tenor, this one. $1.5 billion, so not a small amount. The total facility is 3.2, but numbers don't really matter. Well, with one exception, actually. If a company this size, and this side tells a lot about their experience and their credibility in being successful at deploying money in a sustainable and reasonable fashion, this is where a bank like us wants to allocate our finite resources. And among the KPIs, you had, of course, an interesting features is, of course, CO2 emissions reduction, both at the company level, but also at the portfolio level. I think this is an important feature, although not precisely gender-based. And the gender-based element applies across the organization, of course, and through the portfolio that this company, Baring Private Equity Asia, invests in its money. I'll pause here, but I will just mention that the first ever big transaction was done in France with Euraseo. Mm-hmm. Then we financed EQT and with gender, also these elements, this focus. But I cannot only conclude on private equities. An example that took place, I think it was in February this year, is Coles Group. It's a retail chain, a retail company in Australia. They have 2,400 retail stores across the country, so a fairly large retailer. And the same, they wanted to align their motto, their corporate governance geared towards sustainability and to achieve also better cost of funding. So there is a self-nurturing, element in including gender KPIs in your sustainability linked loan or sustainability linked bonds, where when you do the right thing, you perform better and more stakeholders wants to be around you, and that includes your investors and your lenders.
This is great, and again, I love when you focus as well on this is about talent. It's not so much about gender, it's about talented individuals, regardless of your gender, that builds up the business case that is good for business. Now, Dr. Mariam, again, now looking more to the regulatory part of things, how participation of women at all levels and in all, let's say, categories of institutions in the economy can't be accelerated through, let's say, cross-sectoral or even cross-jurisdictional cooperation. Do you think there is a need for kind of a shift in strategies and policies, as we are seeing for the market? It's happening kind of naturally. Or do we actually need specific legislative push from exchanges or financial regulators?
Well, first I will speak about what needs to be done across jurisdiction. So there are different facets for inequality, across jurisdiction and which needs to be addressed. So generally, women participation can be enhanced by synthesizing the recruitment and retention process to the very specific, situations for women. So we can think of some innovative ways, to achieve this. Like, for example, Harvard Business Review suggests that in order to increase, the chances of women entering workforce, recruiters have to ask or should ask HR professionals to add to the short list of candidates. They did some research and found out that if you add 3 to the existing or the original list, you will end up, the ratio of women to men jump from 1.6 to 1.4, on the original list. So, where there is a will, there is a way.
Exactly.
I'm sure. So this is one thing. Also, gender gap, pay gap is another, difficult thing that we need also to be addressed. In 2020, women worldwide earned 81 cents to every US dollar earned by men. And, that's a jump from 2015, because in 2015, it was 74 to every dollar. So this is also another thing that need to be addressed. So there is a 19 pay gap that, is still appalling and needs to be bridged. Also, the uniform assessment styles at employees. Here at employers, both at onboarding stage, and as well as during periodic performance assessments need to be changed.
This is going back to the point.
Yes. So skill-based assessments is a way to achieve that. I believe in the UK, the employers in the UK are encouraged to use skill-based, assessment and structure interviews, and this, of course, when recruiting, and this will limit the unfair bias. Again, a different type of suggestion that can enhance women entering the workforce is by having women mentor men. So we know that, we have seen that mentoring in the workplace can prove invaluable for, in helping employees advance and progress their careers. So if we encourage more women to mentor men, maybe we'll have more empathy, and we'll have also more cooperation and more willingness to just work with each other and to, help in everybody's success. So this is one also way of addressing this. To top it all is the issue of work-life balance, because this is very important, especially for women. Mostly family, often is the reason for women just leaving formal work. So generating more flexibility in working hours. Nowadays, working from home or having, virtual interactions, that will help for sure. And it will be a good panacea which can enhance work-life, balance. Just to give you an example, an insurance company in the UK published, or, it just advertised all its job by just saying, with the option of having part-time, job share, flexible working, and they witnessed a jump in the application, from women. Not only that, but also they saw rise in applications from men, which mean that, work-life balance cuts on both sides. So most of these, now coming back to the second part of your question, whether we need regulation or just a policy. So most of these policies, cut across jurisdiction, and what would be specific to each would be the methods of implementation. as a regulator and being sensitive to the businesses, it's just, I would consider a balance between the use of strategies and a legal push, to achieve gender balance. Businesses must, understand their own benefits and push and improve the gender balance. So I would not address, to legislate, the company recruitment methods or shortlist or the assessment, but for sure I would, wider aspect like wage gaps, special, leaves, flexible work hour, etc. This can be legislated. So, but for legislating board membership and leader position, I believe this has been done here in the UAE with legislation. So that was done because there was a need to push this, and I believe we succeeded on that. Whenever there is a push for legislation, we're here to
Thank you. Now, it's true that the UAE have been a pioneer in creating this type of policies to encourage flexible working arrangements, working from home, to allow, going back to the point around talented individuals, regardless of their gender, to be able to better balance their professional with their work life. Now, Diana, turning to you now, as a social enterprise, you have been working with some of the largest and most influential organizations in the UAE, and you have been accelerating balance in the boardrooms. We've seen great progress in the last years. In fact, many of the women you work with have been appointed as non-executive directors in the private, so congratulations on that. What are some of the key lessons learned from the accelerators Aurora 50 that you have been running?
Thank you so much for the question. I think the first point to note is that we very much view this as an unbalanced ecosystem. So we very much believed the talent existed and that something was happening to stop that talent from accelerating as quickly if it was a female in comparison to a man. When we looked at that, we could also see that this wasn't necessarily something that the boards were intentionally doing either. This was something that had just happened because of the way the ecosystem had evolved. And actually, when we spoke to people, they were very, very keen on fixing it. They just didn't necessarily know what could be done to move it forward. So a lot of the people that we spoke to understood the business case, really did want to see that change, wanted to connect with these amazing female directors and to have access to them and to bring them onto their boards, but needed support as well. So I think the first sort of lesson that we learned was really that it takes everybody pulling together to make this really, really change. And that there has to be real, genuine intent. Because that's where it starts, is once there is that intent there, then we can work out what it is that needs to be fixed.
If there is a will, there is a way.
If there is a will, there is a way, absolutely. But I think that the importance is also understanding how the ecosystem works. And for that, boards really do need to recognise the very, very important part that they play within this. And this kind of brings us back to the numbers as well, because we have to be very careful when we talk about diversity and inclusion. If diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is really feeling welcome to come and dance. And that is a very different way of looking at it. So it's great to bring the requirements in by law to ensure that we have a woman on the board, but if she still doesn't feel valued or like she's going to be listened to, that isn't going to change how that board actually performs. So it really, really starts with that genuine intent and that culture within the boardroom. So one of the key things within this is that obviously the board has the ability to influence inclusion and the responsibility really to do so for the sake of its stakeholders and shareholders, because ultimately we know that diversity and inclusion adds to long-term shareholder value. So to go back to your original questions of what did we learn, in the very beginning, I think what we saw, which was really, really encouraging, was lots of people being very, very interested in changing this and making sure that other people are successful, and that the barriers that exist already aren't necessarily things that you can fix in isolation. So sometimes you need an Aurora 50 or an accelerator or a different structure to permit you to get access to something else. And that's why it really works in connecting, you know, existing seasoned board directors with women in the early stages of their board career has a very, very large impact for her, because she can think through and discuss board level issues with somebody that she didn't necessarily have that access to before. But also for the seasoned director, because this opens up a talent pool that they didn't have access to before as well. And the savvy directors really do know this. And they are looking for these solutions, and they know that they play a role in rebalancing the ecosystem, and that's why they're getting active and they're being involved, and they're making sure that they join us on this type of a journey, and that they view it from an ecosystem perspective. And it's very, very rewarding. Right. It's really rewarding to see them do that. So I think to go back to your question, what we learned really is the network gap is very, very real. Yeah. But everybody can play a role in actually fixing that. From the women's perspective, the networks that they typically have are not as strong as what the men do. Yep. But also research has shown very recently from Harvard that we actually need to have different types of networks as a woman than what is required for a man. If you look at the correlation in terms of how successful a man will be, typically it correlates to the centrality of that network. With a woman, they actually need dual networks. They need that wide network of both men and women, but they actually also need the inner circle of women too. And that probably has to do with the fact that the ecosystem isn't balanced. Right. And that they need to tap into to conversations with other women to be able to learn, how do I strategize this? How do I negotiate this? How do I do this as a female in this environment? How can I be successful? And that comes from having connections with other women as well. And we actually saw in this particular study that I'm referring to, there was a 2.5 times more authority and more pay for those women that had that dual mix of both networks. So clearly the network gap is very, very important. It is something that women can take much more control of for themselves and put more effort into. But boards can actually also have a huge impact in this space by getting involved in initiatives like this, where they make themselves accessible and they help to develop that pipeline, which means that we will end up having boards of the future that look very, very different. And I think this is what's already been said, is that, you know, it's about what action can we take. It's great to have the intention, it's great to have the ethics, as you said, it's great to want to do these things. But if we continue to do what's already been done, we will be in exactly the same position as we are now. Correct. So what are we going to do today to actually change the way that works? We've got to remove the friction, so maybe change the policies and the infrastructure. And then we've got to actually put the motivation in, which means that more people need to understand the real business case for doing this, because that gets people motivated to actually changing it.
Correct. And the individual responsibility. And the point you mentioned about networking, I think it's great. I think something that really have, in a way, differentiated men from female. I see, at least for myself, you know, networking is a bit like nutrition and fitness. You have to do it, but it gets really complex. It gets very complicated to actually go ahead and do it. But the reality is, if other people are networking and you're not, that's going to have an impact on your application and your career. So, but Diana, what can organizations do to help now that we move forward?
So I think this goes back to driving inclusion, and it's a shared responsibility between the board and management. Okay. So management executes and advances the inclusion mission, and the board ultimately holds management accountable for this. And this is really where we need to see both working in harmony to achieve this. It does need to be cascaded down, but it also needs to include those voices from a bottom up as well. If we assume that we understand what is needed, it's likely that we will implement things that don't necessarily work that well. And so organizations really need to have this as a central part. This will be a strategic move. This isn't something that's going to be a cost center, but rather a strategic asset. And if viewed in that perspective, I think everybody's DNA is slightly different. And it's about making sure that you're creating the kind of culture that is right for your organization. And for that, this is where it does ultimately start with the numbers, because obviously what we measure is what matters. But it's being really very mindful that this is about that cultural change and actually making sure that it's not just numbers on a piece of paper, but that we're creating those environments where everybody has a voice and everybody feels included to drive the business forward, and that everybody takes some responsibility in actually shifting this as well. So for issues when it comes to boards and specifically getting into NED roles or independent roles, you do need to be networking outside of your own organization, and therefore you will likely need maybe an Aurora 50 or other similar organizations to help you with bridging some of those network gaps. But for the organization in the first instance, there's a responsibility that organizations hold in actually driving this change. This pipeline will be built based on the organizations that we have and the investments that we make. And unfortunately, the statistics show currently that organizations on a global basis actually invest more in training and development for men than they do for women. So we're just making matters worse in that scenario. And so this is somewhere that, again, if we just go back to the point that if the organizations measure what really matters and get clear on what those numbers are to measure, then we will see the right kind of environments being created, and we'll see that pipeline actually looking the male pipeline and the female pipeline looking a lot more similar in terms of the number that you have in C-suite, and ultimately then within our boards as well.
Great. I love what you mentioned around the strategic assets. I think something we should be using going forward. We're running out of time, but I've got two more questions. Perhaps Dr. Mariam, we've heard about strategic assets, about the importance of ensuring that you attract, you keep, and you promote and advance. Now, how is ESCA ensuring that the skills and talents of women from diverse backgrounds with different identities and abilities are represented and valued in financial sector companies, particularly in the financial service sector?
Sure. Well, let me just start by speaking about ESCA internally. Because ESCA encourages gender balance by the formation of a gender balance team. So the team is tasked with suggesting measures to the management about policies that which would elicit greater participation from women. So this is the team task. So being a government body, and also we are working under the umbrella of emeritization, and we need to consider that. But within that policy, SCA encourage men and women from different background and diverse backgrounds to join the team. So this is what we do internally. We are committed also to and draw a lot of our inspiration from the Gender Balance Action Guide Action for UAE organization. This is issued by the UAE Gender Balance Council. So our programs are harmonized with the UAE Council in order, of course, to, in terms of its recommended, it has like 5 recommended action. And so we work towards achieving those, 5 action areas. Now, speaking about the financial sector, we have adopted a top-down policy and approach, which is we have started with issuing a decision requiring listed public companies to have, to increase female representation on their boards. So this is like the first step.
That's from next year.
No, it's
already.
yeah, and we are mentoring its progress. Now it's all the companies should abide by this. And once a term of one company board finished, then they have to do it. So moreover, we have continuous collaborations and commitments with various organizations such as Aurora and Dubai Women Establishment and the Gender Balance Council. So and others whomever like support women empowerment. And gradually we envisage moving down, the hierarchy to corporate sector. So for them to ensure that they benefit from gender diversity. So while at the same time, of course, we are working towards fulfilling the UAE gender diversity parameters, also to enhance its position and status and commitments to the UN 2030 agenda for sustainable development, so and to be a role model for gender balance, hopefully.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you. It's congratulations again to the UAE. We as ABGM been working with Aurora 50, BNP Paribas, and of course ESCAN, all this. It's fantastic what has been put in such a short period of time. Now, Jérôme, you are the only man on this panel, so I've left the last question for you. It's a difficult one, I have to say, but can you share your personal insights on inclusion and gender equality and tell us about the why you are in it, beyond, of course, your role at BNP Paribas?
I suppose I cannot raise a joker here.
Please do.
It's fairly simple, although you could have also have added what I'm a white, aging male, so you wonder, what are you doing here? In fact, it's fairly simple. There was a time where I had some hair on my head and I was young, and it was 35 years ago. I remember I had such an appetite to understand the world, the economy, what made progress, and I was studying business and administration. I was in a business school, and we were nurtured with microeconomy and IT and macro economy stuff. And among the papers and studies that we had to read at that time, it was very fashionable to understand what made human progress at large. And the debate at that time, I'm talking about the mid-80s, was the North should help and guide the South to emerge as richer, as with longer life expectations, with the rule of law, and maybe at some point democracy. Let's stop here. And the number one factor for human progress, and let's define in a few words what human progress is: rule of law, peace, life expectations, literacy, the number of schools, your health system, your pension system, everything which I think we share, all of us around the planet, of what should be a society, right? The number one success factor was girls. The moment you allow girls to go to school and take ownership of their life as free individuals, contributing their skills and their ability to learn and adapt to society, then you create exactly what I said, progress. And I started my professional life with this, Then as a man, you want to augment your life, to inflate your life, and you decide to partner with someone who happens to be a woman, and you have a family, and you realize that you do not progress unless you have this backup, because my wife, continues to guide so many things, including in my professional life, because you women, you do not see the world in the same fashion. You do not relate to conflict in the same fashion. You do not resolve to the same means to address issues. And going back to gender equality, it's about fear. It's about fear in front of change. Let's face it, you three, you advocate as women gender equality, as a man, what it means is that the competition pool has just doubled overnight. I mean, should I be comfortable with this? Of course I should be comfortable, for the reason I explained before, because for the kids I have, and I have boys and girls among them, I want this to be gender balanced to ensure sustainability in progress. So, I can speak about this, longer. I've chose myself a woman as a boss when I was sent to this part of the world. Am I at ease with the topic? Yes. I would conclude with this. I do recognize, although it took me some time, because you are the producer of the environment that you grow in. I acknowledge that this is a man-made world, and it will take men to amend it, and that's because of women.
Thank you very much, Jérôme. Thank you to all the panelists today. Dr. Mariam, Diana, Jérôme, again, it's been great talking to you. Perhaps just very briefly, a few takeaways from the great discussion with you today. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, clearly it's not just about gender, but when we talk about gender, it's about talented individuals, all right, regardless of their gender. We need to create policies, systems in place, perhaps with the help from the regulators, but also with accelerators such as Aurora 50 to help us all get there, to ensure that those talented individuals are able to combine the professional with their private life, and that we can get those talented individuals to the top, because it has been proven from the business case, and there was quite a lot of data today, a lot of studies, showing that indeed diversity of talent brings value to the business. Now with that, thank you very much all. It's been great having you, and I hope to continue collaborating with Aurora 50, ESCA, and BNP Paribas to advance the ADGM Gender Equality Initiative. Thank you all for watching.